It's officially May, and you know what happened on the very first day of the month in 1999. Blah 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 Kentucky Derby, blah 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 divorce, blah 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 I don't give a because it was the day SpongeBob debuted its very first episode on Nickelodeon. Since then, SpongeBob has been translated all over the world and ballooned to become one of the most recognizable characters, making his plump rump transcend language. Everyone knows him for his TV show, his interesting run as an AI character on YouTube, and of course, the video games. People always talk about the top tier games like the Battle of Bikini Bottom or the movie tie-in, but what about the ones that didn't review so well? There are 3 games on the PS2 that I don't see talked about all that often, and probably with good reason. So without further ado, let's see how much I want to exist after playing them back to back. So basically, Gary, being the good little boy he is, brings us a very sweet looking chest, and we open it to find it's the resting place of the Flying Dutchman. He gives us some long spiel about how we will be joining his ghostly crew, since we let him out of his tiny little glass room. But of course, being the cowards we are, we sell out Gary, and then spend the rest of the game watching the Flying Dutchman take our friends, who he's not supposed to take, by the way. And we have to find all 7 of his treasures in order to become immune to his magic and turn him into ghostly goop and force him back into the bottle he came out of. You know, it's a very SpongeBob episode sort of story. I could see it being slotted into maybe a 2-part episode, but it also pulls from all over the place, making each section kind of feel like its own episode as well. Going through the Bikini Bottom roughly makes sense with how you see it in the show, and most adventures happen in that little area anyways. But then going to Chum World could feel like its own episode, winning the jellyfish competition in Jellyfish Fields, delivering orders from the Krusty Krab, are all very much ideas that we would see in the show, which is nice. Except one thing. Larry is a fucking asshole for no damn reason. He is literally just such an ass. He has us chase him around Goo Lagoon because he doesn't want to be seen with us, and he wants to get some peace and quiet, which is just a total 180 for Larry as the big boiled lobster that he is. I'd say most characters feel like the characters, but Larry is usually a pretty nice meathead, but here he is just rude. You can really tell the game was made without story being in mind. SpongeBob throughout the game is just jumping from one thing to the other, only occasionally reminding himself that all of his friends are being fucking abducted, all because he was reckless and broke open the Flying Dutchman's treasure. Then there's this sultry voice that sort of points us in the direction we need to go, but doesn't add anything to the game besides being somewhat of an inner voice for SpongeBob.
You can glide a bit farther if you press jump again before you land.
And I fucking hate it. The first half of the game is just full of quips about how stupid we are and that you don't understand how video games work. Which this is a kid's game, so yeah, but as a grown man it is annoying. Speaking of annoying, remember how I mentioned that the Flying Dutchman just takes whoever he wants to be a part of his new crew? Well, according to a book that we read super early in the game, if we find his treasures, we become immune to his power, and he can only take the one who unearthed this treasure to begin with. But he just doesn't care. That same sultry voice I was talking about earlier, near the end of the game, decides to tell us how we aren't immune, just nearly immune, and we have to fight him. But the entire time, he is just stealing our friends so that we have someone to save right before the final boss fight. Which, if you ask me, is dumb. But the fight is also weirdly easy. Again, blah blah, kids game, but hear me out. The combat already is just slapping a fish a couple times until it dies, and you can essentially stunlock them so they just perish, or you can slam your thick sponge cheeks on their head. It's not even needed for a vast majority of the game, and isn't even really used in the main boss fight, which takes a total of 30 seconds. You run away from his little toe-sucking portal, then you toss some bombs at him. Which I do like the fact that we can pick up items, but it's something that feels overutilized at some point, with the entire final level and boss fight, but also the entire level of delivering Krabby Patties, when we could have been doing more fun stuff like throwing water balls or catching jellyfish, which is also something I have an equal amount of love for, but problems with. I think it's amazing that each color of jellyfish does something different. You gotta be a sneaky little boy to catch the green ones. The red ones are out for your fucking blood, The purple ones are stuck in a never-ending loop. And to be honest, I don't know what the yellow and blue ones do, but they do move sometimes. But holy fuck, do you have to collect a ton of them. Sometimes you have to catch them to get a letter, which we will talk about later, but then you have to turn in 100 of them to win the jellyfish competition. Fair enough, we get a blowy suit thing. Then we need to give 50 more to Larry, who, like I mentioned earlier, is a complete dick, but he loves his jellyfish snacks. It's honestly such a forced collectathon, but luckily a lot of the things we need to do to get a letter is relatively easy, but at points completely unexplained. To go back and complete another, hold on, I'm about to say the words, it ruins the flow. I don't mind platforming, collecting money, or standing on a stupid fucking white jellyfish for an hour because I'm brain dead, but having to finish a whole area to unlock one thing needed to finish the second area of the game is just blech. And it happens multiple times. But honestly, for SpongeBob's first major jump into the 3D space, it's not too bad. It also doesn't look horrible either. Honestly, I think it looks better than the games we will talk about later, but it's honestly pretty good for an early 2000s licensed PS2 game. Nothing is super muddy and horrible to look at, but the platforming is a bit more difficult because it's so much harder to judge tight jumps with the art style and the dead zone. Or if you don't understand what that means, how much you have to push the stick to make SpongeBob move. Yeah, I lost my controller. This is a recording. I don't know where it went. Don't get me wrong, it is good enough, but it's definitely not a movement system that is super duper good for precision platforming. You're just a floaty little sponge boy. But what is fun is the crouch jump, which just launches you 20 feet in the air. And you can do an extra little floaty float, and it makes it just diverse enough to be enjoyable. It was an overall enjoyable experience, and got me really excited to play my PS2 again, because I played on the original hardware, if you couldn't tell, from the 30 pixels on the screen at all times. It's quite a short game, and could easily be a weekend or a single day adventure, if you're looking for something fun that isn't super complex or good. So let's teleport ourselves 5 years into the future and play a couple PS2 games that came out in 2007, which is a little bit late for the PS2, but we move now onto a weird one. We jump in between the craziest dreams that would ever come to mind from the weirdos we've come to love, jumping between SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton, and they all start to slowly converge, and we see all three going at it. And in the end, it turns out it was Gary's dream the whole time, all because of those damn Krabby Patties. I usually go to the excuse of it all being a dream when it's confusing and makes no fucking sense, but this time the game did it for me. The game, of course, makes little to no sense, but it makes sense, because it's a dream. Little old Gary eats a Krabby Patty before going to bed and goes on the trip of a lifetime, essentially seeing into the future of Plankton looking for the crumb of a burger, and SpongeBob being fucking demolished along with his house by the Alaskan bullworm. And it's all over the top, and I'm finding it difficult to poke holes in it. We go on in a cycle between all three dreams, or, well, I guess just the one character's dreams, and it switches up game modes well, unlike something else we will talk about later. Yeah, I'm talking about you! The levels actually make sense with the underlying story. SpongeBob in the entirety of the show is trying to get his boating license, and in his dream, he has it, and is racing around like a psychopath, beating the shit out of people with little platforming sections thrown in between. Patrick is a superhero, for some reason, but is absolutely saving lives. And Plankton fucks up and makes a killer Krabby Patty trying to get the formula, so he just makes things worse by going on a whole rampage of its own. It's honestly insane. Trying to follow along is a mess, but it doesn't always have to be as coherent as a story-driven game. The characters act like the characters, except Patrick, because what the fuck. And it's actually a lot of fun and is relatively intriguing and kept me going throughout the entirety of the game. And the levels we go through aren't horrible either. The racing, while not the best in the world, it feels like you're piloting a fucking boat, but it's fun. While driving around in 3 very short laps, we race against one of the others, and they drop hazards that we have to avoid. There are boost pads on the ground, and hell, even the stage changes over time. So by the end of the game, we aren't just going around Coconut Mall for hours on end. It's not an overly complicated system, but it's also not as floaty and clunky as a lot of other kart racers that come out. But the same cannot be said for the flying in the little plane we get later on. Not only do we have to do an obscene amount of rescuing, but once Old Man Jenkins builds the plane, we are even more on rails than a racetrack. We move within a little circle and collect these weird Z token thingies. We can shoot in very specific situations, like when we fly in circles to take down King Plank Kong, but it doesn't leave me fulfilled. While on the other side, with the Patrick superhero levels, not only does the graphics switch up breathe a new life into the game for me, but punching the shit out of Paper Patricks and watching them change as they get closer to death is just fun. And the puzzles, while not mind-boggling, also bring a little bit of an oomph into a game I wouldn't consider one of the better SpongeBob titles. Each slam has its own animation, and also every attack has its own animation. It's not just the same thing translated from SpongeBob to Patrick, leaving it with actually a decent amount of variation. Going back to strictly the 5N Pink Dildo, he also has a blowing ability that, combined with the slam and the Hulk dash, makes the puzzles much more interesting than I thought they could have been. And then there is this huge disparity between this thing that we like very much and these little weird in-between games where we are sucking up trash and trying to sort it. I think they easily could have been left out, and the game just shoved me into the next level. Because they do nothing besides give us extra sleepy points, which, when it comes to the base game, have no real purpose. There isn't really a reason to collect them unless you really want to go around the game and do everything you can to get your money's worth. And the same with these weird little blobby goop things that are needed to unlock alternate endings. And to be honest, I was more than happy with the SpongeBob ending. But it is kind of cool having the collectibles be used somehow, even if it is just another ending. I can't say that I would personally go through the entire game again to find the ones I missed, because holy shit did I miss a lot. But I will honestly say that the game is probably the best one I played in this video, and I don't think that's much of a spoiler based on what game is coming next. I think it's honestly the game that went fastest, which sounds like a horrible thing to say, but my time with the game was just kind of over, without me knowing or thinking it was coming. In the other two games, at points, I was kind of looking at the clock and thinking that I've been at it for a while this had just enough variety and a simple story to keep me somewhat involved. Unlike the next game we were going to look at, and the one to round out Sponge Month 2024, Atlantis Squarepantis. Yeah, and it's interesting to say the least. So essentially it follows the story of the episode, except we see into the future first, with Plankton going on a fucking rampage. Then we go back to beginning where our favorite underwater imbeciles are blowing bubbles and trying to take pictures of it. Patrick, as always, is just the smartest in the room, and SpongeBob thinks it's a good idea to be a little braggadocious bitch and ends up blowing a huge bubble that leads them to discover a piece of Atlantis. Now, it all goes upside down. The Krusty crew go to Atlantis, where some dumb fuck takes a picture of a bubble and it pops. Nobody's mad because it's not the real bubble. Then the real bubble is popped and we have to escape. Plankton ends up finishing his rampage, and we all go on our merry way. Now, there isn't much I can say about the story, because it's the story from the episode, but I have my quarrels. First of all, I'm not the biggest fan of having the future in the past, because then we have to go all the way back to the future, then before you know it, we're 3 movies in, and a lifelong dream of having a hoverboard, but the best thing we have is a one wheel, but it's fucking over $3,000, then you have to learn how to ride the thing, and even though I already skateboard, I know it's not going to transfer. Moral of the story, it ruins not only the plot, unless you're me and have seen the episode literally hundreds of times, but also ruins progression. It's not a situation where you start off Omega Strong and then get fucked up, bringing you back to the start. But you are just essentially spoiled up until Plankton goes on his ice cream rampage. That kind of moves me into my next point. Not really, but they made their own cutscenes to replace scenes shown in the episode. Like, why? What is the point? I can see how for continuity's sake of not constantly switching between episode and video game graphics, but in this case, everything is so rounded off and muddy. This way of recreating scenes almost shot for shot, but in less quality from a cartoon, is just insane. In one scene where Patrick is pushing SpongeBob like a wheelbarrow, the amulet is spinning. How? They only found one half of it in the cave, and the other half is in the museum that we haven't even gone in yet. And they cut out probably the best scene and the most recreatable part of the episode, where they legitimately get sucked into a video game. And to be fair to the developers, they were probably under heaps of stress to get it out in time to release, but it would have been nice to see actual gameplay elements used in the game instead of what we got. If the developers didn't put so much time into recreating cutscenes and just using the ones from the television show that came out a month after the game, maybe we could have some actual gameplay elements and a fun world to explore.
Oh, you stink!
That, if you did not catch that, was sarcasm. I'm pretty confident it wasn't up to Blitz of what kind of game to make or how much time they had to make it, but with that being said, it's a glorified minigame game. We start in the tank, which I would say is pretty fun and quite quick. To complete a tank level on average, I would say 10 minutes if you're just playing casually like I am, and it's simple to understand and is actually a tad bit enjoyable. Then we have the somewhat puzzle platformer levels, which are also relatively fun for how basic they are, but they seem to drag on a bit too long. I like how each character has their own special ability, with Patrick being the fucking Hulk and throwing anchors like it's nothing, Mr. Krabs being a gold digger, Squidward speed walking like a grandmother through a mall, and SpongeBob being the best damn fry cook in the sea. But having 4 to 5 mini levels in one of the larger levels makes it overstay its welcome. It's not as bad in the second half of the game when we are escaping from Atlantis, so every level has us using a different pair of characters, but at the beginning it's just SpongeBob me boy and Podrick, doing the same thing 4 or 5 times in a row. Then there is the Pokemon Snap wannabe picture taking levels, where again we do the same thing over and over, 3 to 4 times in a row, tossing burgers to murder people and snapping photos of random little artifacts, which is actually kinda cool, but there isn't much to it. It's nice seeing pieces of SpongeBob lore, but it's just like, click click picture, toss some patties, click click picture, but nothing, and I mean nothing, is as bad as the rhythm sections because oh my god are they far too long and far too boring. You just sit there and press the button in a certain time window, which is already really relaxed, but then if you miss, the window gets larger. You would think if you keep messing up, especially on tours where you are losing people if you fuck it up, that it would become harder, but it doesn't. Honestly, if I wanted to play a rhythm game, I'd go play Super Mario DDR. Yeah, I bought Fallout 3 again. I can't go this whole time just complaining without saying that I did enjoy the game, but I had the dangerous rose-tinted glasses on, since I played the game as a young lad, and I was utterly disappointed. I remember it being amazing since I loved the TV special, so having a game with cutscenes blew my mind in 2007. I honestly wish I had so much more to say, or some new revelations when it comes to Atlantis SquarePantis. Besides that, it's kinda bare bones. But stacked up against even Revenge of the Flying Dutchman, it's so incredibly lacking, and now I'm just sad. Depression aside, before I end this video, I can't believe it's been 25 years since SpongeBob has come out, and it's been interesting, but I have so many good memories from the show, the games, and the movies, and I'm sure a ton of others do. It's crazy how a yellow brick is as well known as he is, but can we all agree that Nickelodeon should stop fucking ruining the image all of us have as SpongeBob? Leave him alone!
It's a first-rate town, but all you ever notice are the ways it stretched too far. And it has been knocked down, while some of us are still left here between the scars.
Oh yeah, and I'll say it. I don't care that David Bowie was in Atlantis SquarePantis. I don't care that he didn't sing. I just liked the episode when I was a kid. I'm sorry.